Before we begin Lecture 4, I want to briefly go over what we've talked about this first week. The first thing we did was identify some of the key functions of the HR department. We then looked at some of the challenges that face the HR function. We looked at the connection between HR and line management in managing people. We talked about how to connect HR to the business and determine if an HR function is performing strategically. For this last lecture of the week, I want to spend a bit more time on this concept of strategic HR management. Any HR professional, whether new to the field or veteran, will be more effective and more valuable to the organization by viewing HR through a strategic lens. This will be the differentiator between the personnel administrators of the world and those that rise to really achieve human resources officer or specialist positions. Through this class, as we've done in Week 1, we will go through the basics of each of the functional areas of HR, but we'll also incorporate the strategic thinking throughout. Let's spend a bit more time rounding out this understanding. As strategic HR professionals build a relationship with line managers and with employees to ensure they're engaged in the running of the business, they take conscious actions to focus on clear and measurable objectives. They're not only listeners and reactors, but they're proactive partners in the business. Instead of just developing generic initiatives or the programme du jour, they're developing things that are tailored to that business unit to meet their issues and needs. They're constantly learning, and they're aware of what's happening in the business. We'll talk more later in this course on how to build your skills as a strategic HR partner. Here are a few things to consider. When a true HR strategist understands the business, they are business savvy. Through this understanding, they will develop personal credibility. Imagine an HR generalist or partner who invests time to really understand the business and the details around how products were made, the ins and outs of productions, the variables that affect the outcomes, and so forth, so that she becomes so knowledgeable and so conversant with all levels of management that when she requests money or training resources or time off for her reports, she receives no pushback from management. She will have developed high personal credibility and, in turn, proficient and effective outputs for the business in terms of human capital, from knowing exactly what was best for her business. Thinking strategically, not just planning siloed initiatives or introducing best practices that worked at another company, will align output to the organization's goals and needs. We'll talk about this last bullet a bit more, the skills to persuade and influence, having a strong character and being prepared to counter risk to the same degree as any board director. Gary Hamel, a respected author and leader on business topics, puts forth this challenge to the HR professional. He says, "We're going to have to find ways to get our employees to bring their creativity and their passion to work every day." He goes on to say, quote, "We need organizations that are fundamentally more adaptable, more innovative, and more engaging places to work than they are right now. It's not an easy task, but finding the answers to these challenges, allowing employees to be more innovative and more creative and more passionate about what they're doing, will differentiate the great companies from the others." End quote. I'd like to introduce one more concept that I find really interesting and one that can be seen in many leading HR organizations. It's how the HR function is managed. When you look at what's occurring, it's much the same as the evolution of the finance function. So have a look at this. When we look back to the finance function, we find that sometime around the mid-70s, the VP of Finance role was bifurcated into two roles. We had the CFO, or the strategist, and we have the controller, or the transactional role. Both roles are critical to the effective running of the organization. But it was found out that not only was it difficult for one person to manage both areas and both functions, but they really did require a different skill set altogether. Interestingly, the HR function has seen a similar bifurcation of roles. More and more, we're seeing two roles in HR, the HR management, analogous to the Chief Human Resources Officer, who has more of that strategic focus, and we're now more and more seeing an HR controller that has more of an operational focus. This chart and the following charts can be found below this lecture. Taking a step back, the CFO role has really emerged to govern an organization where prediction and strategic insight provide the highest value to the enterprise. Now, financial analysts take on the role of working with the business units. They understand their finances, maybe where they're off on some of their finances, where there are issues, and where our exceptions to the original business plan need to be made. They're driven by metrics, and they're focused on driving results. And in finance, you'll also see shared service component. It's comprised of areas like payroll, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and so forth. Those areas are much more efficient and much more effective when they're run centrally in a shared services environment instead of being duplicated within each business unit or location. It's much more effective to run them at a corporate level instead of duplicating that effort. You'll also see in finance what you can refer to as centers of expertise. They're comprised of functions like accounting policy and taxes that really need specialists who keep up on the trends and the changes in the practices that affect the organizations and affect all of finance. And now, like in finance, we're seeing the same structure emerge in HR. The HR business partner role, which is similar to the finance role or the financial analyst, works directly with the business units to ensure their performance and identify what they need to be successful. They'll oftentimes use metrics, and they're very much more focused on results. We're also seeing in HR the shared services concept, and it provides corporate services like the human resources management system, training programs, administration, again, things that are best handled centrally from an efficiency and cost-effectiveness standpoint, rather than being duplicated within each individual unit. Instead of replicating those throughout the organization, it's much more effective to have them in a shared services environment. And also, you'll see centers of expertise within HR like talent acquisition, talent management, rewards, etc., that are comprised of the people who really are specialists in those areas, who keep abreast of those areas and bring solutions to the business. For example, a business partner might identify an issue and bring it to someone in the center of expertise to come up with solutions and best practices. The role that we're seeing emerge is the Chief Operating Officer, or COO, of HR. This person is really focused on running a cost-effective and efficient HR organization. They're focused on process improvement, metrics, and reporting, among other facets, to support the organization and to support the business partners in their endeavors. As with the CFO and controller, or the COO roles, we're seeing these two roles emerge and become formalized to ensure that both the operational and the strategic areas of HR are handled appropriately. As you look closely at your own or other organizations, you'll start seeing this balance and structure more and more, with a bifurcation of strategic and operational roles. It's something very important to keep in mind moving forward.